Hi, I'm Rita. Welcome back to my booktube channel, Life Worth Reading. We have arrived. It is the end of the year, and today I want to talk about the worst and most disappointing books that I've read in 2020. I thought about if I should do a disclaimer or not, but I feel like we're all grown up here, right? If I dislike a book that you love, that's completely okay. Reading preferences only, I completely understand. If you hate a book that I love, so let's just be all grown-ups here and just accept that we don't all like the same things. So yeah, that's my half disclaimer, half commentary on reading preferences. And yeah, when I say that I didn't enjoy a book, I am in no way offending neither the author or people that have enjoyed the book. So let's just forget about that negativity and just talk about some of the books that I didn't like this year. In this list, I will say which ones that I actually really didn't like actually hated, and some of which were just disappointing because I didn't want to do a whole separate video on just disappointing reads, so I'm kind of putting them all together and talking about the ones that I didn't completely hate, but that got a really low rating or that were very disappointing to me. I have in total 8 books to talk about, which is not bad at all considering that I've read 50 so far this year. So I really didn't dislike that many, and let's just get into it. I wanted to start this video talking about one of my only DNFs of the year, and that is Perfume by Süskind. This is a Portuguese translation, which basically says Perfume, Story of a Killer, and it was just so boring. That's my main complaint for this book. It was just boring as hell, barely anything happened, and I just couldn't get myself to finish it. This story follows a man in 18th century Paris that was born with a weird, supernatural, overpowering sense of smell, and so he makes it his life mission to create the perfume, which is to capture the essence of what he calls an innocent virgin. Yeah. This book was just such a drag to get through. My brother recommended it to me because he knows I love weird and gruesome shit. So I figured that it's a relatively short book, and I figured that it would be like a really fast-paced man going on a murder spree kind of thing, but it was not. I read over 2/3 of this book. I still have my little bookmark in here. I was like 70 pages away from the end, and in all that time, barely anything happened. Really, it was just so boring. Maybe it was probably because of my expectations going into it. So if you know that it is a slow story to begin with, maybe you will enjoy it. But it was just not what I was expecting. This was putting me in a reading slump. There are a lot of descriptions, which is great because the author does them very well, but it was just such a drag to get through. I have heard that the ending kind of makes up for it and that it is very explosive, and that's when the really weird and gruesome stuff start. But I just couldn't get myself to the end of this book. It was just so overwhelmingly boring. If any of you have read this book and didn't think so, please do let me know, because I want to know if it's just something wrong with me for finding this book so fucking boring, or if there are anyone out there that also think the same. Next up, we have Wicked Fox, which is a really sad book that I did not want to include on this list because I really thought that I would enjoy it, and it's one of Books with Chloe's favorite books, and I really do respect and usually agree with her opinions, so it was really sad that I didn't like this book. This book does fall on the side of the most disappointing reads of the year. It is not a book that I hate. It is not the worst book that I read in 2020, but it was one of my least favorites. So let's talk about why. First, I do want to talk about what I did enjoy about this novel, which was the setting and the culture. I love reading South Korean literature, so anything related or influenced by that is always very interesting to me. And the setting of this book was very well done. I did love learning about Seoul as a city and learning about all the myths and creatures that the people believe in and don't believe in. So the cultural and setting aspects of the novel was very well done, and it was very interesting for someone outside of it to learn about. But unfortunately, that's also where the author fell short for me, because I feel like we could have learned so much more about this culture and about this fantasy world that she set up. I feel like we could have done a lot more with the world building, and that it felt not developed enough. I understand that this is a short book, so of course I'm not expecting like a major world building setup, but I feel like this had the potential to be so much more than what it was and for us to learn more about it than what we actually did. Other than that, my main problem with this book was that it felt very flat and cliche for me. If I had to say just one thing about The Wicked Fox that I didn't like, was that it took itself too seriously. It read like a teenage drama romance that could have been actually really fun if it didn't take itself too seriously. Because I knew that there would be a romance and I was actually rooting for that. I do not by any means dislike romance in fantasy books, but I don't like it when it overpowers the actual story, which is what happened here. And yeah, there was just way too much teen angst and back and forth and miscommunication for me to actually enjoy this book, because those are tropes that I generally do not like. And so having that and having a fantasy world that felt a bit incomplete and a plot that didn't really resonate with me ended up becoming one of my least favorite books of 2020. I didn't really want to enjoy this book, and by what I've read on Goodreads, I am not an unpopular opinion here. A lot of people didn't really enjoy this, but I'm still kind of sad about it, you know? I really did want to like this, but I didn't. Now I'm really about to get on people's nerves because next up I want to talk about The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I didn't enjoy this book. That's it. Again, this is not the worst book I've read this year. I am not going to like bash on it endlessly because I didn't at all hate it, but I didn't enjoy it either. I know that a lot of people do enjoy this trilogy, and by reading it, I understand why. I really do see that guilty pleasure aspect to it, that entertainment aspect to it, but there were just some problems with it that I just couldn't overcome. Mostly what really, really, really bothered me about the world building in the first book was the lack of it, basically. One thing is that as I was reading this, I kept thinking about Harry Potter. And yes, we do not stand J.K. Rowling in this household. We say yes to trans right. But what we have to agree on is that the world building in Harry Potter is very well done. And what I did notice was that the transition between the Muggle world or the human world and the wizarding world was very seamless. It felt weirdly natural for it to mix up, and in The Cruel Prince, it didn't. Because one chapter we would be in the fake court, and then the next one we would be like in the human world at Starbucks drinking a frappuccino. And it just felt very disjointed to me because I did not want to see the human world, or at least these aspects of the human world. I didn't want to go to the mall. I didn't want to go to Starbucks. I just wanted to see the Fey world. So yeah, I felt like that transition of them like traveling to the human world and like being in the Fey world was just very disjointed, and it felt very confusing to me, which was something that didn't happen in Harry Potter. Even in the first book, I'm not even talking about the rest of the world building, but even in the first book, you really don't bat an eye when Harry goes from like normal London to the wizarding world, and it's because it's just a very seamless transition. Like, it is well done. And being completely honest, this was my first Fae book, at least I believe it was, and I still don't understand how Faes work. I don't know if there's like a basis for what a Fae is that everybody just knows by reading different books on it, but I really didn't understand why there were Fae with such different characteristics than other Fae, and I feel like that really wasn't well explained. Like, why do some of them have animal parts, and do some of them have like deformities and such? It was just like a very confusing process to me, and maybe it was because I haven't read any other Fae books, but I really wanted to learn more about them and about what they are, especially because I feel like the only thing that I did learn about them was that they hate humans. But I wanted to know more about these creatures, and I feel like I didn't. But I didn't completely dislike this book. I do have a little soft spot for Cardan, and I liked it enough that I actually read The Wicked King, which I thought was a lot better. Not great, but like it was a lot better than The Cruel Prince. But I feel like The Cruel Prince was just an awkward start to the trilogy that really didn't mesh well with me, and I felt like the world building really lacked in explaining this world. Next up, I want to talk about Carry On by Rowell. This is one of the first books that I read in 2020, so my memory of it is not the sharpest, but I did make a few notes about it, and I want to discuss why I didn't like this book. First of all, and what seems like apparently my major problem with fantasy books is the world building. Here, it felt like I was reading the skeleton of a story and not the actual finished product. I really wanted to feel this world a lot more instead of having all this unfinished information shoved down our throats. What I did read in a lot of reviews on Goodreads for this book, and that I do agree with, was that this would be like the final installment in an already set fantasy series. And so it really does feel like we're just picking up the final book in a giant series and that we have no idea what the hell happened before. And we were just picking up in a really awkward moment where you don't know how we got to where we are now. The only thing that did save this book for me was the romance between Simon and Baz, and Baz's character in general, because he does have my heart. He was the best character out of all of them, and so their romance really did save this book for me. And maybe if Rainbow Rowell had focused even more on the romance, the rest of it wouldn't have felt so lackluster by comparison, because the end result, in my opinion, was neither a complete fantasy nor a romance. It was just kind of stuck between the two genres, and it really did not work for me. I did give this book 2 or 2.5 stars because I did enjoy some of the changes that the author did to the original Harry Potter series, which was more queer and POC rep. And a lot of the other enjoyment that I had was from the romance and from Baz's character, because I loved him. And I just wish that we could have seen more of their romance even. Some of the other characters felt really shallow. I even completely forgot that Agatha was a thing until I saw some Goodreads reviews. So some of the characters were just so forgettable and so empty and one-dimensional that it really bothered me. I do feel like the author tried to do too much with this book, and that a lot of it still came up very short from a good standalone fantasy romance, and I'm really sad that I didn't enjoy this because I really wanted to, but unfortunately I just couldn't look past these things that did bother me with this novel. So yeah, Carry On, one of my least favorite books that I read this year. Next up, we have Galatea by Madeline Miller. I read A Song of Achilles last year and Circe this year. Look out for that in the best books of 2020. And so when I saw that she had another short story inspired by Greek mythology, I just had to check it out. But unfortunately, I hated it. I think it was like 20 pages. It was a very, very short read, and I just hated it with a burning passion. From what I do remember, this is basically a short story about Galatea, which in the original Greek myth was a statue that came to life, I believe. A sculptor did a lot of sculptures and hers came to life, I think so. But the short story had nothing to do with that original premise. But yeah, I hated it. I have nothing else to say about it. I just hated it completely with a burning passion. So that's all I have to say. Next up, we have The Wise by Tarryn Fisher. This is a thriller that I read earlier this year, and oh my god, it was so bad that it was also kind of amusing. The entertainment value in this book is through the roof because it's just that bad. Like, laughably bad. If you want a great review and a really funny one on this book, please do watch Read with Cindy's video on this. I will link it down below. It is amazing and has everything that you need to know about why this book sucks so bad. Basically, this book follows a girl that I have completely forgotten her name. Please do not ask me, I do not know. But she is married to a man named Seth, which is a really vanilla man that somehow managed to have 2 other wives at the same time. So basically, this girl knows about it. She doesn't know who the other 2 women are, but she does know that she's in a polygamous relationship with this man. But soon she starts to find out the identity of these women and kind of starts to stalk them. Please do read the trigger warnings for this book before going into it, because it did have a little plot about miscarriages. So if that's something that's triggering, or if you do not like reading about that, please stay away from this book. And also because it's really bad, so you should stay away from it because of that too. But it was just hilariously bad. I wish I had something else to say. Basically, this author did the same reveal twice. In the 50% mark, you get the reveal about what's going on and you think, okay, this can't be it. And then she tries to add like other little reveals that ultimately become nothing, because the actual final reveal is the same one as the 50% reveal. So more than half of this book is just not necessary, basically, because you have the first reveal and that's basically what counts until the end. I really didn't enjoy this. Okay, that's a lie. I did enjoy this because of how bad it was, but I do not think that it is a good thriller. I gave it a 1 star. This just really wasn't it. So if you can avoid it, I would suggest that you do so because it is not worth your time. Next up, we have The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I'm literally coming for BookTube's beloved books in this video, so this is where that disclaimer kicks in. Please do not hate me for not enjoying some of your favorite books. I really do not mean to bash them. It was just not for me, and I completely respect people that enjoy the books that I don't, so please do the same. I had never read anything from Erin Morgenstern, but from what I had heard, you either love or hate her writing, and unfortunately I have to say that it is definitely not my thing. The main thing that bothered me about this novel was just how pointless it felt. For me, it felt like Erin Morgenstern was just trying to like flex and showcase her writing instead of actually writing a story. This had little to no plot, which I would have been okay with if it was character driven. I do enjoy character driven stories, but that also wasn't the case, at least in my opinion, because our main character, Zach, was just one of the most pointless main characters that I've ever read about. He doesn't do anything. He just follows everyone else around and hopes that the answers will just come to him. And it was just very frustrating to like follow him as a main character because it was so boring. He had no drive, he had barely any personality, and it really didn't help that there was little to no plot because he was not an interesting character to follow along. I did enjoy some of the short stories that were mixed in between this book, and I did enjoy the queer rep, but unfortunately I also didn't enjoy the romance that ensued in this book because it's not that I felt like the characters didn't have chemistry, it was just really undeveloped because they spent so much time far apart, and that when they did finally come together, it just felt unrealistic and underdeveloped. I'm just gonna read you a phrase that I did tab in this book that completely showcases why I didn't enjoy this book. Basically, our character says, "I think the egg was a metaphor," and another character answers, "Can't make an omelette without breaking a few metaphors." I want to ask, what does this mean? And I feel like a lot of the time as I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, her writing is sort of beautiful in certain ways, but in others, it's just, she's really just trying to flex on us. Look how poetic I am, and look how I think and how you don't. Like, whew, can't make an omelet without breaking a few metaphors. That's gorgeous. And I was just thinking, wow, this is really not my thing. I do respect immensely other people that enjoy her works and enjoy her writing. I think that is amazing, and not everyone's writing is for everyone, so please do not come for me for thinking this, but this writing was just a little too flowery for my taste, and the lack of plot and the lack of character development in this didn't also help me feeling this way. So unfortunately, this book was a miss for me and one of my least favorites of the year. And finally, we have arrived to my least favorite book of this year. This was the worst book that I read in 2020, and that is The Power by Naomi Alderman. I gave this book 1 star. I really, really, really didn't like it. I wish I had anything nice to say about this book, but unfortunately, I really don't. This was just a complete miss for me, and I really hated it. This book is about women that all over the world are suddenly discovering that they have the power, which is that they can gather electricity in their fingertips, and with a flick of their fingers, they can inflict terrible pain and even death to the men. Which means that suddenly they are a lot more powerful than the men, and that it starts a world revolution that pits the two against each other. Pretty much this book explores the power dynamics that have been set in our world between women and men, and how easily they could have been disruptive if women woke up with a supernatural power. The concept was really interesting, but unfortunately it did not deliver any of it. We followed 4 perspectives, 3 women and 1 man who is a journalist, and surprisingly his was one of my favorite perspectives. I feel like the story had a lot of potential and a lot of angles to approach it from, but unfortunately the one that the author picked to explore was not what I wanted, and I didn't end up enjoying it at all. I wish we had focused on a smaller part of the world, a continent, a country, because trying to follow a whole world revolution in just over 300 pages made this feel very incomplete. There was so much to explore in this concept, and the perspectives that we were stuck with were boring in comparison to what the author could have done. The only other POV that I did enjoy was from a girl named Allie that basically starts a whole new religion that is meant to empower women, and that was really interesting to read about, but unfortunately even that felt incomplete and unexplored. But what really made me give this book 1 star was the ending. I guess this could be considered a spoiler, so if you're still considering picking this book up, which I really don't recommend that you do, please do skip ahead until I am no longer holding the book. Basically, throughout this book, we have a countdown until a really big event. Like you can see here, it says 5 years to go. And we soon find out that this event is basically like the end of the world. And we later find out that it will be by a nuclear war, which is really scary and kind of accurate. So yeah, we are counting down to this really big explosion that will literally end the world. And throughout this whole book, I'm just like, okay, at least the ending will redeem some of it. Maybe it will be really interesting. And I swear I'm not a psychopath, I swear. But I thought that it would be a cool ending that would redeem this book being so boring. But we get closer and closer and closer to the ending. And the book just ends. Literally. Literally, like the book ends and we don't get to see any of it. And this would have been okay if the author didn't make such a big deal about us counting down to this event. You know, like in every chapter, we see that we're closer and closer and closer to this big event that will literally end the world, and we're counting down to that. And then we get to the end and we don't see any of it. The book just ends like that. And it was just so frustrating. Like, I couldn't believe that I had wasted reading this entire book, counting down to something that never happened. The Power is a book that had a really interesting concept and that we could have seen a lot of cool things done with this premise. But unfortunately, for me at least, it felt so flat. It was so boring, such a drag to get through. And that countdown to nothing really did aggravate me and really did annoy me. So I have to say 1 star for me. This was my least favorite book of the year. It was the most frustrating experience reading I had in 2020. And I really hate this book. That's all I have to say. I really hate this book. Okay, so those are 8 of the worst and most disappointing books that I read in 2020. Please don't hate me if I came for any of your faves. This was not a hot take at all. These are just a few of my opinions on these books and why I didn't enjoy them. Let me know what are your opinions on these books that I did mention and what are some of your worst books that you read in 2020. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more bookish content, and I'll see you in my next video. Until then, always remember that life is worth reading.